going on, guys? Welcome back to episode of Fishing with Flair. Today I have an informative video and I'm going to be going over my top 5 favorite winter bass fishing lures. And I am going to range these from when the water just starts to kind of cool off all the way up until right when it's about to freeze. And I'll kind of go in that order. And so I have lures that start reeling in fast and then go all the way down to just barely dragging the lures on the bottom. So my first lure, and this is for when the water starts to cool down, it's like a late fall, early winter lure when the bass are still pretty active, and that is going to be a lipless crankbait. And so for the lipless crankbait, I usually throw a 1/2 ounce size, and then which this one is a 3/4 ounce. Sometimes I will go with ones that have rattles and some that do not. I just let the fish tell me what they want. And I usually stick to shad patterns, especially in the fall when a lot of the shad are starting to die off. But I'll also go to somewhat of a craw color because I do find that they still eat crawfish. But the crawfish are definitely a lot darker in the fall, so I stick to darker patterns, something with like a black back, something like this, like a craw. It's a craw color, but it's a little bit dark. It's this one's probably a little too light, but you never really know what the fish will eat. It really just kind of depends on the lake, actually. But start with shad patterns, but if you find that there's a lot of crawfish still moving around in the rocks and the water's still warm enough for them to be active, then pick up a craw-colored lipless crankbait and give that a shot. Then once the water starts to cool down some more, I'm more of a power fisherman. I don't really like to finesse, so I like to keep a crankbait in my hand. And in particular, I like to go with the jerkbait. I'm not a very good jerkbait fisherman, but I know it's very effective. And so I'll pick up a jerkbait like this. This is a bigger mega bass jerkbait here. That's probably the biggest size I'd throw. But if I'm around super big fish, late fall and winter are great times to catch giant bass. And so I go with the big jerkbait like this. But I have different brands here. I have a mega bass, I have a Ricklon, I have a Smithwick, I have a Livingston, and I really like to stick with the shad patterns for jerkbaits. I don't really vary much from that. Maybe depending on the sunlight. If it's bright, I might go to something chrome or gold, something with a little bit of flash. But maybe if it's cloudy, I'll go with a solid pearl color or just a solid color in general, something that doesn't give off a lot of flash. And like I said, I like to throw that when the water's too cool for a lipless crankbait, but not too cold for them they're still a little active. And so that's when I like to go with the jerkbait. Fish are still active, they're still feeding, they're still moving, and the other thing I like about the jerkbait is you can twitch it very quickly and get a lot of reaction bites, or you can twitch it and you can wait 30 seconds to a minute between twitches. And so in reality, you can fish this as fast or as slow as you want, which is another reason why I like it. And I like to go with the suspending one, that way it stays in place and the fish have a lot of time to locate it. Then once it starts to get a little too cold for the jerkbait, I go to some more bottom baits and just slow moving baits. And one of those baits is a drop shot. And so one of my favorite baits to throw is this little Gambler shaky shad. Just something that imitates just a little bait fish. And I like to keep the leader short, so in between the weight and the hook. I don't like a lot of line. I like to keep this towards the bottom, but not right on the bottom, because I want to make it look a little bit different than a shaky head or a jig. And the reason why I want to do that is because it looks like it's something that's wounded. So if you keep it close to the bottom and you slowly just twitch this shad, it looks like a bait fish that's not dead, and the fish are still interested in it because, you know, it's a fresh meal. It's not dead and rotted away. It's still fresh, but it's wounded and it's an easy meal. So it's just slowly twitching close to the bottom, so it's easy for the fish to find as well if they are hunkered down towards the bottom, which a lot of them do in the winter. So yeah, drop shot, it's another great bait, and you can vary the length of your leader. You can go really high if the fish are suspended, or you can go really low if they're towards the bottom. It really just depends. You know, grab a fish finder or just vary it and let the fish tell you what they want. And then once I know that they're on the bottom, or they're definitely feeding on the bottom and they're picking up little scraps and stuff like that, I like to go to a shaky head with like a little finesse worm on it, green pumpkin, or a watermelon, depending on the water clarity. By far my favorite. And this one is just basically cast it out there and don't hardly move it. You keep your line tight and you sit here and just quiver it. Just enough to get that tail shaking just a little bit, but you don't want to do long hops or anything like you do in the summer. You want to keep it right on the bottom. And why I would want to use that is because a lot of times, depending on the plastic that you're using, if you're using a floating plastic, that worm will stand straight up and sit there and quiver. And so you don't have to move the head of the jig. Basically what it'll do is it'll stand up just like this. and this tail will sit here and quiver like this. But you don't want to move. You don't want to move the head. You just sit here and quiver the tail, and that will entice any lethargic, slow bass that are just looking again for an easy meal. This one imitates a worm, you know, or a bait fish instead of a shad. So it really just depends on the forage, as well as you can crawl it over rock piles a little bit better than a drop shot sometimes. It just kind of depends on where you're fishing. And then if it really slows down to where I cannot get a bite, this is when, if I go to a lake and most of it has ice on it, but there's a little bit of open water, this is the lure that I pick up, and it's a jig. And I have two different types of jigs that I like to throw, and depending on where I'm at and how big the fish are and how active they are is how I decide this. So the first one that I pick up is a football head jig. This one here is a New Tech. This is a football head jig. You guys know all I throw is New Tech jigs. Great jigs, best jigs on the market in my opinion. And what I like to do with these football heads is to just slowly drag it. You cast it out there, you go on the bottom, and you just slowly reel it in. No hops or anything like that. You just go real slow. And so I do two different types of trailers. One might be something like this. This is a Rage Craw. And this one has a lot of action, but if you don't pull it very hard, it will just do slow movement. So it's not going to be super fast kicking. And then the other one that I like to use is something like this, not with a whole lot of action, more of a chunk trailer that doesn't have any, you know, flaps or anything like that. So if the bass are chasing just a little bit, seem a little active, then I'll go with something that flaps. But if they're not active at all, they're just not moving, they're not in the mood to eat, then I'll go with something like a chunk that just kind of floats in the water, just moves how it wants to, and doesn't have any kicking action. And then if it gets super tough, this is just when I cannot get a bite, I will throw a finesse jig. And something like this. So basically, if you guys don't know what a finesse jig is, you take half your jig and you cut off the skirt. So you can see it's all flared out here. So you take half of the skirt, you take the top half and you trim it up. So it looks like that. And then you get a small trailer like that, little craw trailer. So it just slims down the presentation. And the reason why I like a jig over something like a craw is because the skirt, it has movement and it creates lifelike action. And so what you want to do on these football head jigs is keep it fairly long. So see, this is a long jig. And what happens when you keep it long is when you drag it and stop it, it pulsates. The jig skirts, the hairs, they move. And the longer the hairs, the longer it takes for them to move. And so if you're sitting there with a short skirt, sorry about that, my camera just died, but what I was saying is the longer you keep your skirt, the slower and the longer it takes for the skirt and the jig to react. And so you don't want a jig with a shortened up skirt like you do in the summer that has a lot of pulsating action and just has a lot of movement, because the bass don't want that the winter. They want something that's easy, that will not put up a big fight to chase down and to eat. And so you either want to keep your skirt really long or you want to keep it very short. And what I mean by very short is like this, on like I said, the football head jig, that doesn't have any action. You know, when you're pulling that along, that the water will not move those top strands very much. It's not going to be kicking around and stuff like that. And so the difference between the two is the finesse jig is just a slim down presentation. So if I'm around smaller fish that can't eat a big bulky jig like this, or if you just know the bait fish in general or the forage, whatever it's crawfish or bluegill, are smaller, then you want to go with that finesse jig. So you either want to trim your skirt down and thin it out, or you want to leave it long. You don't want a short skirt is what I'm saying. Keep it long or thin it down. That's basically the two variations of jigs that I'll throw. So that's basically it. Sorry, it was kind of a long video. I wanted to make this one short, but I also wanted to fill this with plenty of tips for you guys that still are fortunate enough to be able to fish. Unfortunately, me, I can't really fish anymore. I'm starting to get in a little bit of duck hunting. I already put the bass boat away. I may do a little bit of pond hopping, but very doubtful that I'll actually catch anything. But I am going to California, like you guys have heard, and possibly going down to Texas in late January to fish with a couple other YouTubers. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can throw those down in the comment section. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Just ensures me that I'm doing my job and doing the videos that you guys want to see. So that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching.